Welcome to Corona Cartoons, formerly Venture Bros of the ATH Network. I'm your host, as always, Brian Dressel. With me this week is a friend from, what is this, 11 years? Is that what we said?
Yeah, I think it's about 11 years.
11 years ago since we've talked. But, you know, joys of the internet kept us in touch. We have Mr. Jeff, and I've never said your last name out loud. It's Frumess.
It's Frumess.
Frumess.
There you go. That you're not the only one. That's okay. These things happen. I do it all the time to others.
I mean, we've been friends for years before we took the very long break. And I'm like, it's a weird thing when I started podcasting, I started reaching out to like older friends. I'm like, I don't think I've ever had to say your last name out loud.
Well, first of all, that's what I love about Facebook and staying on Facebook is that, you don't have to talk to someone, but you can like kind of, peer into their life or you see what, someone is doing from a distance without having to. It's just a nice way to stay connected. I really like that. And when you, Brian posted, hey, does anybody want to talk about cartoons? And I love cartoons. And I was like, yeah, you know what? Why not? I love doing podcast stuff. And so I threw my hat in the ring, and Brian graciously accepted.
Yeah. I've been looking forward to this one. Like, I haven't had a chance to rewatch Doug or Angry Beavers in a very long time. Like, or a reason to, I should say. Like, I can whenever I want. I just never really had the motivation to do it.
Right.
So this worked out really well. When you're like, yeah, I like these shows here. I'm like, that would be fun.
The Nicktoons are classics, man. The Nicktoons are classics. They're just.
It's very weird how like they're classics and how like there's so many people from our generation, like in their like early to mid 30s or like maybe late 20s, who just grew up on these things, and then there's so many other people who have never even heard of them. Like my wife is around the same age as us. And I'm watching Angry Beavers, and she's like, I've never even seen an image from this show.
Yeah, it's kind of weird because they feel. So here's the thing: on one hand, they feel like modern cartoons, but on the other hand, they're also 30 years old, and that's just that's just it's crazy because you look at something like Ren and Stimpy, and that's also because cartoons. I think, Brian, cartoons age differently than other mediums. In the fact that even like their Disney cartoons and Warner Brothers cartoons, besides the technology that they're using in the cartoons, that feel like they could have been made, 10 or 15 years ago, and they're from the 50s and 40s and 30s, and it's just like it's mind-boggling how they age differently than live action.
Oh yeah, that's gonna be really like next week, or we have an episode that will be diving into a lot of the older stuff, and it's gonna be interesting because we're gonna do. I guess I'll just tell you, we're doing Who Framed Roger Rabbit for Corona Cartoons next week.
Oh, that's a great pick.
It was a friend of mine who's like, I just want to talk like something positive in this whole quarantine situation, but I'm not a huge fan of cartoons. I'm like, well, give me something animated, and you can come on the show and we can chat. And she's like, well, I love Roger Rabbit. I'm like, that'll work. Let's do it. So let's dive into this. So I kind of want to start with Doug and then move into Angry Beavers and then just see where that goes. Because I started with Doug because that was my pick. Like we chose the two shows. I'm like, all right, let's pick an episode from both shows and then we'll just kind of talk about it. Jeff just kind of hobbled together an episode because it didn't quite line up the way he wanted to. And I just kind of went for the one with the one that I liked in it. So we have an episode I don't really like, an episode I love ferociously, an episode I totally forgot about but was fantastic, and another one.
And another one.
That's kind of how we'll go through all of them. But the reason that I always stuck with Doug, just kind of diving into it, was Doug was a character for me, and I'm sure many other dudes in the similar age group, where I'm like, that kid is me. Like, I get lost in my imagination all the time. I wish I was a superhero all the time. I wish I was Indiana Jones all the time. Like, I did that. I would get lost in daydreams constantly. So I related to Doug a whole bunch. And, like, that was my jam. Did you have similar feelings towards Doug?
Yeah, I have a lot. Well, I remember what I thought about him, back in the day. But I also have sort of like, kind of looking at him from an adult pretext, see something incredibly different. I see a kid who suffers from crippling anxiety, who gets deliriously lost in daydream fantasies to get him through his problems, writes in a journal. He lives in a very weird world that, on another level, in some other universe, maybe once again, to bring up live action, to pull this into a live action universe, almost even Lynchian in the sense that, they live in, what's the name of the place they live in?
Something Bluffs.
Bluffington.
Bluffington.
Yeah, they live in Bluffington. they everybody in this world, in this reality, is a different color, which is a beautiful message from 90s enlightenment, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's so you have different people who are different colors, which is kind of interesting. But it also is a little I don't want to say problematic. I started with the Wacky Wizard.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Bryan. Bryan, can you explain for your audience what it is that Doug is into? That how do his daydreams work?
Well, I mean, like if you've never seen the show, like basically what'll happen, if it's not every episode, it's basically every episode. There'll be some sort of inciting incident. Say for the 2 episodes this week, he's playing with the love of his life, Patty Mayonnaise' new toy, which is basically a frisbee that makes noise. It's called a Wacky Wizard. And he chucks it really, really hard, and it goes over a fence and into a yard with an evil dog there. So how does
basically
he get
the plot of Sandlot?
Exactly, yeah. But swap out a baseball for a frisbee.
Right.
Now, how do you get that back? And then he immediately starts imagining himself as Indiana Jones. Like, how would Indiana Jones get this back? Indiana Jones with his right-hand man, and like, what crazy adventure would we go on to go steal the jewel or the thing back? And that's kind of how his thought process works, of like how to treat this like an adventure. And the second episode, the main reason that I picked this one as the whole thing, was Doug's Garage Band, where he and Skeeter, his best friend, are just having a grand old time, just banging on a trash can, drumming on a streetlight, having the best time of the day. And some guy's like, "Hey, keep it down out there. I'm trying to work in here." And when they look inside, their favorite band ever, the Beats, not the Beatles, is having an interview, and they ask him, "How did you get started?" And he says, "Well, I was just in my garage, and I was beating on a cat and this thing. And my mom's like, 'Stop that.' So I went out with my friends, and then, we wrote Killer Tofu." And the rest was history. So Doug immediately thinks of himself as a member of the Beats, and, well, I should start a band because I could be just like him. And he has a whole imagination about writing a song with a plunger. And like, it's just, there's an inciting incident, and then his imagination takes it and just runs with it. And I did that all the time as a kid too. So I've always really, really enjoyed that.
I kind of like how we're like the Siskel and Ebert of this thing. And I'm not saying I don't see that side of it, obviously, and especially as a kid. And obviously, he's a daydreamer.
Yeah.
But he also, I guess from an adult, I'm just like, God, like this kid just can't get a grip. Like even, I noticed that there are these dramatic electric guitar stingers for dramatic, those like, like whenever something like really crazy is happening, like it's just like his daydreams just get the better of him. Like just imagine, it just like his anxiety gets sort of amped up. But I mean, yes, that's what we do as kids. We like project. That's what I did as a kid too. It's like you just pretend you're you use a prism. You project yourself through a prism of something that is way more enjoyable, or that makes an everyday situation seem more exciting. In this case, in the first episode, Doug is instead of Indiana Jones, he's Race Canyon, and then he's also got a James Bond guy. He's got a few different characters, and then there are like one-offs for certain episodes, and then you have Skeetari, his assistant, which I guess is like Haji, or I don't know. And then I'm like looking at like Skeeter, and I'm like looking at this again. There was a period of 90s enlightenment from decades prior, but even back then it was still, I'm sure by today's standards, like 30 years later, it's like, whoa. You got the blue guy as a dude named Skeetari talking with like some sort of generalized foreign accent. When Race Canyon produces a steak for the man-eating lion / Sandlot dog, Skeetari, he licks his lips, and it made me think, like, does he eat often enough? Like, does Skeetari have enough food? Like, he works, he's the right-hand man of Race Canyon. Is Race, like, paying him enough that he could provide for himself and his family? Because the moment that Race throws this giant, I mean, that steak probably cost $60, right?
Probably, yeah.
And here's Skeetari licking his lips. And another thing to touch on, Bryan, in general for both these episodes, but mainly for the first one, the Sandlot one, they use kid logic to solve problems, i.e., let's put a bologna sandwich on a stick because that's how we're going to get, instead of talking to their parents and having their parents call the neighbor whose house it is that has the Wacky Wizard, or even just ringing the doorbell. They're like, we're going to use a bologna sandwich. We don't know how violent or vicious this dog is. We're just going to tie a bologna sandwich to a string and then just put it out there. And at one point, Doug thinks that the dog has consumed his friend Skeeter.
Yeah. But I mean, like, even the kid logic of the end of the episode just tells it like it is, of why don't you just come tell Patty that you lost it?
Right.
Like, sorry, dudes, like, you might get yelled at, but you did screw up, and if you lost it, you lost it. And then it turns out it would have been no big deal. So just be honest.
In the end, they do value human life over the wizard, and that's the important lesson, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, they do just end up giving it to the dog after a while.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Brian. What is the deal with Pork Chop? Is he like Brian from Family Guy? He doesn't speak English like Brian does, but he seems to be sentient. He seems to understand English, and Doug seems to understand Pork Chop's barks. So is it like a Chewbacca deal? Like, what is Pork Chop's deal?
I've always figured Pork Chop is somewhere in between Brian from Family Guy and Snoopy from Peanuts.
Interesting.
He's like somewhere in there, like the same level, like cognizant, like thought process, but he can't quite talk or make himself a martini or want to bang, Lois. But there's definitely an intelligence to him. Like, hey, we want you to come distract this dog, and his way to distract is try to take the dog on a date. Like, clearly he's smart enough to be able to communicate, but he's also not. He's not gonna be driving a car either.
And that's kind of, but he's also operating a primitive recording setup for them to record their demo.
That's
banging
also
on
true.
A trash can. So, and he lives in an igloo. So I don't know, man. I don't know.
There's something there with that dog, and I'm not sure what it is, but he's an interesting character. I'll give him that much.
By the way, I hope you can cut this out if you want to. By the way, in college, for anybody who listens to this podcast, Brian and his roommates once did something really great. Sorry, this is slightly off topic, but I just figure I should bring it up because it's such a wonderful memory from college. Brian and his roommates decided to throw a 99 loft balloon party. What does that mean? It means they filled up their dorm room with 99 red balloons and listen to the song 99 Loft Balloon by this band. What was the band called?
It starts with an N. Like Nenya, something like that.
Yeah, Nenya. Yeah. And listen to it 100 times in a row while everybody did a circle pit in their dorm room amongst 100 red balloons and just sang the song over and over and over again. If you don't, that is good, clean college fun. I will tell you what.
Yeah, that party got a little out of control in following years when we did it again and again.
Right. You did it at the second place you guys had.
Yeah, after the first year, we upped the music and we upped the balloons. So we didn't just listen to one song. We didn't just have 100 balloons. We had like 3 hours of music and something like 700 balloons.
Crazy.
Yeah.
I just was reminded of that just now. I had to bring it up. But yeah, back to Doug for a minute. Yeah, they're just like, there's like a lot of interesting sort of stuff here going on in these episodes. Yeah, and obviously, as Brian was mentioning, the format of the show, and like, there's an inciting incident and it brings you into like these daydreams, and Doug is kind of taking us through it in the form of his journal. His journal is like a voiceover throughout the episode.
Oh yeah.
There's a lesson, even in the Angry Beavers and all these Nicktoons, there is a lesson to be held. And I'll turn it over to you, Brian. What do you think those lessons are in both of these episodes?
Well, the first one I think is pretty just clear cut. Tell the truth. Like, when you screw up, tell the truth. Like,
right.
Because if they had just told Patty, like, hey, we lost the Wacky Wizard, went over this fence, shoot him, like, whatever, here's the box that I have of them, and I also can get more whenever I want them. So, just tell the truth. The second one's a little bit different. Like, the Banging on a Trash Can episode, or Doug's Garage Band as it's called, like, that one has stuck in many people's heads, like, far beyond their childhood.
Oh, yeah.
Like, even if you weren't a big fan of Doug, you usually remember that episode, like, if you saw it, just because the song was so catchy, and it's like, oh, I could start a band. I am just banging on a trash can.
Yep.
And that one, I think that the message gets a little bit more muddled in there, because it is like, be creative, be who you want to be, but also don't let people influence who you want to be. And, like, I feel like that message is a little bit harder to nail down, but it's still something worthwhile. Like, because it's not don't sell out unless you want to, but it is also kind of like, hey, don't sell out.
That's actually very interesting. I I did not. That's totally valid and something that I did not see when I was thinking of. I was trying to think of what the theme is, but the theme that I picked out, which is very similar to all those things, maybe it's just like different wording. And you know what I wrote down in my notes here, and this is true for all these Nicktoons, is it's a folly theme, meaning there's some folly that befalls the main characters, whoever's the highlight in the episode. And it's like the theme is like a lesson that they need to learn. And the thing that I wrote down, like I said, related to what you said, is everyone's ego destroys the band. Everybody needs to be in the band. They can't just support the band. And the band gets too big because, BB is telling Doug, hey, you got to think big. And so Doug keeps thinking big. And as that happens, his ego is growing and growing, and everybody else needs their ego to be represented in the band. They can't just contribute something. They have to be a part of it too. And, by the end, I counted, by the end, they had a minimum of 4 drummers. And everybody had to take a solo. They had some weird horn players in the back. I don't even know what genre of music it was. And lastly, I just want to say, Brian touched on something. This episode, Killer Tofu, banging on a trash can, was totally a song of our generation, the 90s kids generation. It is deeply enmeshed in the pop culture zeitgeist of 90 kids subconscious. Everybody knows, just the way that everybody can go do 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 do. Everybody else knows banging on a trash can, drumming on a street, right? So yeah.
And almost nobody remembers the second part of like the think big part, which just speaks volumes to the quality of the episode of, no, Doug and Skeeter were onto something. They had a catchy song.
Right. Because when you're an artist, in general, when you're an artist, and Brian, you being an artist yourself, I'm sure you can speak to this as well. It's like when you start to create something, when you first start creating something, it's when it's most pure. And the more you think about it, the more diluted it gets. People's opinions, like Baby's opinion, starts getting in the way. You got to think big. All of a sudden, the song goes from banging on a trash can to banging on a trash can, think big. And they're throwing in these elements of the Stop Talking Sense, David Byrne's Talking Heads, Stop Talking Sense, Big Suits. And he's like Michael Jackson. And the song slowly, ruins, slowly stops resembling the pure thing that it once was. Quick side note, I think the character Elmo, who's like that nerdy kid that's going to do the light show, I really liked him. I thought he was really, really great. And also, I noted that the Grateful Dead also had 2 drummers. I don't know why. I don't really know from a musician standpoint what that does for the sound. I can't imagine 4 synchronized drummers doing anything good.
No, that although I will say, who is it? Dan Deacon had 3 drummers for a while, and that was pretty awesome. Dan Deacon, he does like house music.
Oh,
but
interesting.
Like live house music, so it's not just all like mixed. And that was pretty awesome. I saw him live once, but it wasn't like 3 full drum kits. It was just 3 percussionists playing different drums.
Right.
So like if that's how you're doing it, there could be something there, because I know Modest Mouse has 2 full-blown drummers too.
Oh, really?
And I've seen them live. I don't know how many times. I'm like, I don't know why there's 2 of you, but I like it.
And they're synchronized when they're drumming?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, the Grateful Dead guys are synchronized too. I'm a casual Grateful Dead listener, but I thought about that. And also another thing I noticed in the opening Daydream segment where Doug and Skeeter have made it big, and I love when Doug goes, "Plunger, plunger." he's like, I could write a song about this plunger. Look, plunger, plunger. That's another thing that I remember growing up, and I used to always make jokes about that too. Like I'd be like, hey, look at this table, because it's just like, it's so true though, like, about like thinking you're more creative than maybe you actually are. But the thing that I noticed about Skeeter is he speaks with a British accent. So in the first episodes, he's Skeetari. He speaks with like this foreign accent that I guess he's supposed to be, like, I guess, just something. I don't even want to say what I think it might be. I don't know, because I don't actually know. It's just like, my point is just that it's supposed to be some foreign accent, Eurasian accent from somewhere. And then once again, it's like Doug is speaking regularly, and then Skeeter is, slips into this British accent as if it's like there's some sort of synonymous quality with being British and being a rock and roller.
Well, I took that as, their favorite band, the Beats, are British, so
Very
since they're
true.
mimicking the beats, I assume that's what they were going with.
Kind
of what I
nailed
assumed.
it. I think you nailed it. That's
Yeah.
what it is.
The only other thing I want to say about this episode before we move into Angry Beavers is we were just kind of dancing around a little bit, just kind of talking about the things in it. But the music video, when they finally join up with BB and they just start getting bigger and bigger, and Doug's wearing like the bad outfit, and that whole thing is just gold.
Oh, I love it.
There's so many like little references to like 80s and 90s music in there, and it's just like, holy shit, like they spent time on this.
Yep. They had Michael Jackson. That's where they had I guess maybe like a Madonna thing, and then you had the suits from Stop Talking Sense with David Byrne.
What was I recognized Doug hanging from a string with like the guitar, but I can't remember what that's from.
Yeah, that seemed like it was referencing something, and I just didn't know what it. I didn't know what it was. Honestly.
Yeah, even as we were watching it, like I googled, I'm like, man hanging from string with guitar, and I couldn't find it. I'm like, but that still looks terribly familiar, and I just don't know what it's from. So I guess listeners, if you know what I'm talking about, hit us up. Let me know. By the way, because I was unable to.
I just want to say, like, it really, once again, reiterate, Banging on a Trash Can is a really great song. Whoever they hired to write this song and write the Killer Tofu song, however they came, I'm sure the writers came up with the names, but, like, someone wrote these songs.
Oh, yeah, and they're legit songs. Like, Banging on a Trash Can, every time I watch that episode, which granted hasn't been for a long time, I will sit through the entirety of the credits, because that's the only time you get to hear the song in full.
Oh, interesting. Didn't even think about that.
So that's kind of everything I had to say about Doug. Let's move into Angry Beavers, and I'll let you explain the situation with the Angry Beavers, because I found it really funny. Even though I did enjoy both episodes, the second one had me going, I wonder why he picked this one.
I didn't even take notes for it, to be honest with you. I started, and I was like, you know what, man? I just, like, totally shit the bed on this. And I was, like, going to text you, and then I thought, you know, he might have watched it already and taken notes. And, like, it's so unfair to, like, correct yourself. Like, you just got to you got to stand by this choice. So I just did not. Because if you know, usually when I, like, go do something, I try to, like, take notes and just, like, you know, have stuff so I can remember. It's really
of course.
Just, like, a memory thing. Yeah.
But yeah, so we did Angry Beavers. We did I forget the name of the two episodes though. Like it was
Food of the Clods.
Right, and then the second one I don't remember the name of it because the one you sent me wasn't the right name.
Sisters. I sent Brian. I messed up, guys. I sent Brian the Angry Beavers season 2 episode 9, the day the Earth got really screwed up, and as it turns out, it was the wrong episode. Angry Beavers is kind of hard to come by these days, at least as far as I know. So I just did a quick Google search on Dailymotion, and that popped up. Not the most ideal way to watch cartoons.
No, luckily Doug is still on Hulu. I was hoping Angry Beavers was going to be too, and nope. I think you have to buy the seasons on Amazon if you want to watch them.
Oh, for real? Okay. But we could just say that we watched Food of the Clods and we watched Sisters.
Yeah.
Brian and I watched Food of the Clods and we watched Sisters, the Sisters episode, and that's it. And so to set up the Angry Beavers world here, this is a very interesting show. So there's a forest, right? And there's a lot of different animals in the forest. There's a bear who's kind of like Barry, what's his face? Barry White. There's a Barry White
definitely.
bear.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different animal characters. But there are these two beavers. They get kicked out of their mom and dad's dam, and they start their own dam, and they have the coolest beaver house. I mean, growing up, that's what I remember. The two things that I loved about Angry Beavers growing up was A, I loved their really, really cool house, and B, I love that they watched B horror movies, which is why I wanted to do Food of the Clods so bad, because for this episode of your podcast, because I just love the parody. That's the thing that these and for a lot of 90 kids like myself, I'll speak for myself, a lot of pop culture, or a lot of just in general, like, a lot of media things were introduced to me through these Nicktoons. So these ideas of these cheesy B horror movies, kind of like the parody version of them, was introduced to me through kind of Angry Beavers, growing up. I knew they existed, but I never watched one. But I watched one through the parody of this cartoon and developed an acquired taste for it.
It's kind of interesting how well they do a good representation of what those movies were like, because they are kind of parodies, but in the same way, we just did an entire month on Behind the Hype of Joe Dante, and like how much. I've always been a Joe Dante fan, but until I did a whole month just studying his film, I didn't realize how much he was influenced by B horror films, like just across the board.
And he does I don't know if you've ever watched Matinee.
We covered that movie for the podcast. We do an entire episode on it.
Currently available, a really nice version of that movie is available via Blu-ray at Shout Selects from Shout Factory. Nice. It's a great release. I picked it up. It's wonderful. So if you're looking to catch that movie, check that out.
Yeah, and like because of my love for Joe Dante, both before the podcast that we did on him and after, I got into these B horror films a whole bunch. And then that was way past my time of Angry Beavers. And now going back to this show, because I haven't watched Angry Beavers again. Like I've sporadically turned on Doug here and there. Angry Beavers, not so much. This is the first time I want to say since probably my early 20s, I turned on an episode again. So it's been over 10 years. And I had forgotten their love of these B horror films. And this was just a joy to encounter again, especially with the episode that you picked. Like it was such a good way to kind of get back into it.
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
Because you're right. Like I love their house and their taste in movies. Like, and especially, I'm not sure if you remember the pilot of this show. I've always remembered it because it bothered me when I was a child. I'm like, it shouldn't be that easy. They make their house kind of by accident.
Yeah, it's totally an accident. It's just like a bunch of junk like falls into place and their house is just built.
Yeah, it's like, all right, let's just move in here then. It's like, what?
The house is kind of like immaculate conception even. It's really weird.
Yeah.
It just falls into place.
And Nickelodeon was really good at giving their characters cool fucking houses to live in. Like, it was these guys and then Arnold from Hey Arnold just had the best places to live.
Yeah, he had a high-tech place. And then the flip side of that is Ren and Stimpy, where, I mean, they just lived in the weirdest houses ever. They live like in a horse's bottom, or like they live in like a dead cow. One episode, their house was made out of a dead cow. Another time, they like lived in like the armpit of like a giant, like just weird places that those guys would live.
Nickelodeon, man, like Nickelodeon in the 90s, they just had a weird sense of humor that just spoke to me.
But that was the 90s sense of humor. That's like what's and true. You know, look at MTV in the 90s. Holy crap. I hope you do an episode devoted to like the Max and like Cartoon Sushi and like all that stuff, because it's just so out there. The 90s were such a wonderful time for creative indulgence. It was a time where, you know, on a certain level, not with everything, but on a certain level, studios and just, you know, the people that had the money, the gatekeepers, they were taking chances on really weird stuff. And if you go to, you know, studios today, they'd just be like, well, that's like not marketable to like a 10 pole, you know, 4-quadrant, yada, 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 or it's not a proven IP. But in the 90s, they were just like, wait, okay, so it's a cartoon about a bunch of brothers that wear togas, the brothers Grunt I'm referring to, and they like they live in the underworld or like just weird stuff. Or this guy is an alien living in his head. What a great idea! Here's $1 million. Go make this cartoon. Or
just look at Nickelodeon. So it's half a cat, half a dog, and it can never go to the bathroom. All right, let's make a show.
Right, cat dog.
Yeah,
what the hell? I mean, it really was. It was a great. Or Rocco's Modern Life is just full of crazy nonsense. Just like Angry Beavers has some really weird stuff. By the way, I love how the Beavers and this is going throughout the two staples. One that I remember from back in the day, and holy crap, Brian, I realize I should have given you another choice for Nicktoon, Aerial Monsters.
Oh,
what a crazy show! The Gromble. The Gromble was like a cross-dressing. He wore high heels. Like that was like for some kids, that's like their introduction to like being a transvestite.
That show was something else, man. Like
they would view people's scares through the eyeballs of the monster. Like these monsters would scare people, and then the way they had technology. Mind you, they lived in garbage, but they had technology that allowed them to view the memories of the monsters through their eyeballs, through this projector, and everybody would grade them on how well they would scare people.
What a weird show.
What a weird show. And the Gromble was just a weirdo. And they're hundreds of years old, these monsters, even though they're kids. Back to the Beavers. I just had to bring that up for a second. It's just really weird, though.
Let's get back to it. So the thing that we haven't really talked much about in the B horror movie episode is the main, like, the main drama of it is that I always get them switched up. Norbert, or Normie, or whatever you want to call him.
Norbert is like the cool hip one, and Dag is kind of like the dweebazoid.
Like the more spastic.
Yeah, spastic is the word.
Yeah, so Norbert, he starts having, he eats way too much fucking junk food, passes out on the couch, and starts sleepwalking and imagining himself in these movies. And then blatantly denies it every morning.
Oh, it's so great. It's so, my first thought in my mind was that how jealous I was that this is literally the perfect plot for a horror movie. Like, first of all, I just want to say that, these guys, they love spicy food. They love jalapenos, and they love like logs, like maple log treats and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've totally eaten way too much junk food and had wild dreams. That is true. And I think that's what the folly moral of the episode is. Don't eat too much junk food, or else you'll feel really bad the next day and you'll have nightmares. Yeah.
Or in this case, you'll have sleepwalking nightmares.
Right.
And what do they call it? He's like, he's not sleepwalking, he's nightmare walking. Is that what they call it? He's
nightmare walking. Yeah. And I could just imagine a horror movie where like some teen just starts eating junk food while he's watching horror movies, and when he falls asleep, he wakes up, he dresses up like whatever horror movie he's watching, and he goes out and he murders someone and totally doesn't remember it the next day, like a somnambulist. And I could imagine Joe Dante directing something like that, actually. You know, it's a great idea that I'm like legitimately thinking like, how can I like adapt this?
And it came from an Angry Beavers episode that is surprisingly awesome.
Yeah. Could you get sued if you just like basically took that stripped that down to its bare bones and then just, made up your own like vehicle for it?
Well, now that it's on this podcast and you're admitting that you're doing it, it probably would be.
Yeah, well, whatever. Like, I'm like super jealous. Like my wheels are really spinning. And I feel like that happens a lot with these. There's just a lot of really great. I feel like if you want to get inspired as a writer, just go watch some old Nicktoons shows, and it will spark your imagination and capture your imagination to just go wild.
There was something that I'm trying to remember where I saw it. It was like one of those like maybe like We Remember the 90s shows or something like that. But they were talking about Nicktoons and how Nicktoons in the early 90s were kind of like the punk rock of children's programming. Like there was still lessons, there were still good things to learn. That's the same thing twice. But there was still like there's good music that was still engaging. It would inspire creativity, but it was also done through this lens of like stuff maybe your parents aren't okay with you seeing. Like look at Ren and Stimpy. It's kind of gross, but it's also really funny. Or like Doug like has these like, well, he's I don't really have a good example for Doug, but like Angry Beavers would be more of a like they're just kind of like slobs. They just kind of sit on the couch and watch cartoons all day, but there's still something quality there. Like it's really impressive when you look at it and how long they're able to keep it going.
I think the word you're looking for, I think you're totally right. And I think the word that to accentuate everything you just said is these cartoons are super subversive. That's what they are. And what they do, especially Ren and Stimpy. And I love Ren and Stimpy is one of my favorite Nicktoons of all time. I have the series. I revisited that in college when it came out on DVD. I bought all those DVDs and I rewatched the show for the first time. You watch that Egg Yokio episode and you're just like, what on earth? Like there's an episode, there's this guy, Uncle Meat, and he has a meat cart and he goes around like proselytizing, like he's like a preacher. Like there is crazy stuff going on in these Nicktoons. And it's just like, but the whole point is that in order to like, it's almost like a game for these creators. It's like, what can we get past the censors? And I actually have a note here that at the end of that Sisters episode that we should not even really talk about because it's just so basic and lame. But somebody says meanie weenie poo heads. And I wrote down Nick's censors did not mind that. So Nick's censors heard meanie weenie poo head and were like, you know what? This is okay for little kids to watch. Which by the way, I think it is. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just saying that I'm sure that part of the criteria for these censors, when they're watching these Nicktoons is we have to imagine that whatever is being said on these shows, these kids are going to take into the classrooms. So whatever language is used, we need to assume that the kids are going to say those things to their friends. And meanie weenie poo head is something that was totally acceptable to say to your friend in class via the Angry Beavers, via the censors letting it slide.
Yeah, that's true. And it's weird now, like watching this stuff as a parent. Like your kids are older than mine, but it is just kind of weird. Like, would I show this to my son when he was the same age I was? I'm like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I would, but I can't guarantee all parents would feel that way. Like this stuff, like we've kind of gotten a little bit more as a society, I think, more conservative with what our kids can see as we've gotten older, where we've gotten like less conservative with other things. As far as like children's programming, we've gone far more conservative. But I don't think there was ever a problem with this stuff. Like I don't think this was ever like poisoning minds or anything. In fact, I think it was probably good.
Yeah, but there were like, I mean, there's like, there are these moments, like, again, going back to Ren and Stimpy, like there are these close-up shots where like everything is done in like this excruciatingly disgusting detail, and it's just like, it's grotesque. Like it's purely grotesque. There's episodes about pulling out your teeth, you know, and having stinky nerve endings. Like just nightmare fuel. I mean, even look at like Rugrats, which I'd say is probably your most basic vanilla sort of like show for young kids. And like, you know, you have that episode where Angelica's getting a baby brother or sister or whatever, and the baby is like a nightmare. It's like a scary, and it's like I get what the moral is, like, oh, you know, don't be afraid of your siblings coming and embrace them. But like that baby tries to eat Angelica. Like he's like, oh, I'll eat you too, and like puts Angelica in his mouth and like tries to like eat her.
Rugrats had an edge to it. Like it always had just a very slight edge, or I don't think any of us would have been watching it at the age that we are watching it. Because it's a show about babies, but kids who are way older than babies are like, no, I dig this.
Somebody came up. There's like there's like these modern interpretations of Rugrats that are like actually really sad. Like, I gotta look this up. Hold on, real quick. It's Tommy is like a miscarriage or something. Oh, here he goes. The Rugrats theory. This is a creepypasta. The Rugrats were really a figment of Angelica's demonic and unimaginable imagination. Chucky died in 1986 along with his mother. That's why Chaz is a nervous wreck. Tommy was born in 88, but he was a stillborn. That's why Stu is constantly in the basement making toys for the son who never had a chance to live. The DeVilles had an abortion in 1990. Angelica couldn't figure it out whether it would be a boy or a girl, and that's why she creates the twins. So the kids are supposed to be a figment of Angelica's imagination. So it could, I mean, there's a lot of really sort of nightmarish interpretation that you can go with some of these Nicktoons.
Good Lord. I've never heard that. That is
dark. It's nuts.
Oh man. That is
but back to the Angry Beavers for a minute. I just want to touch on, first of all, one of them is wearing a teacup bra. That's really weird. So he just has taken 2 teacups and put them on a string because they're supposed to be Viking women from Mars drinking radioactive lava because they want to be the brides of a volcano god in one of these B movies.
Man, I would watch every movie they watch.
Me too.
No, I love their when Daggett finally goes, oh, like like I need to fight fire with fire on this. It was fantastic.
Right.
Like the rest of that episode is just pure joy.
Right. Yeah, they just start eating more and more junk food. And by the way, the episode does end with them vomiting off screen. It cuts to like an exterior of their really cool house because they see the title of the next film they're going to watch is called The Oozing Flesh from the Rotting Hand. But yeah, you know, listen, it's great, man. And there's like one episode I remember where like one of the B movies, it's a thumb that's been sewn onto a spleen, and it's called The Crawling Spleen.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
Just really weird, wacky, wild stuff. They live in canoe. They have canoe bunk beds,
which I always wanted as a kid. I loved those things.
Yeah, that was, and I love Mops for Mambos is the commercial. That Daggett, he gets possessed and he becomes like a dancing guy with a toupee, you know, Mops for Mambos.
Yeah, that makes sense. It tracks.
And it's also the message of like TV will possess you. TV will influence your behavior. So if you eat junk food and you watch TV, you will have stomach aches and you'll become possessed by the TV and enact horrifying things like trying to attack your brother with a makeshift axe.
It's a very, very on point message. Very direct. The weird thing is, like, when it comes to Angry Beavers, I watched it all the time as a kid, and I vaguely remembered this one. I did not remember the Sisters episode at all, so that was kind of cool to rewatch an episode I had never really remembered, but also at the same time wasn't the best episode. The episode I always remember the most is, I don't remember the name of it, but it's one where they decide to stay up all night just because, they don't have to follow their bedtime anymore. It's always the episode I remember the most. That was a classic, just fantastic episode.
And they have big bags under their eyes in that episode.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they're just super tired. I remember that.
Super tired, and then they find out they've stayed up for like 100 years.
Right. They come out and it's the future.
Yeah.
Whoa. You just totally, like, tripped my mind back.
You just have that Norbit ending. How long have we been awake?
Right. And that's the thing. That's the dynamic. The brothers, you have Norbert. He's kind of like a playboy, like kind of like suave, like cool, hip. He's friends with everybody. He's like the laid back, impulsive one that always has a good idea or always comes out on top. And as you said, Daggett is spastic and more nerdy and more like bookwormish and like, but he's not like bookwormish and like intelligence. He's just like, I don't know. He's just kind of like a maxi zoom dweebazoid.
Yeah. He's just, what's the current phrase? He's a bit extra.
He's a bit extra. That's right. That's right. And I've seen some cartoons today. Like, it's interesting to see technology like in new cartoons, like be like, oh, wow, those bears are using cell phones or whatever. It's kind of weird. I feel like the 90s ones, even though they had modern advances in the 90s, like in these cartoons, I still feel like the people that were making them, who were influenced by, Warner Brothers and Disney, they sort of kept that sensibility, that like old timey sensibility of the, between the 30s and the 60s or whatever, when sort of designing and making these cartoons.
Yeah, definitely. And it might have been a little bit of the 90s mentality and just a little bit of Nickelodeon, because all Nickelodeon shows had they were never like the same show over and over, but they all had a similar feel to them. Just like when you watch a Disney show, you can tell it's a Disney show. When you're watching a 90s Nicktoon, you can tell it's a 90s
brand.
Nicktoon.
They totally had a brand, and obviously orange is the color, and like and we didn't even touch on, this is really off topic, but like just in the fact that we're talking about Nickelodeon is, you had Snick. Remember Snick? You had the big orange couch. Like you're a kid, like you don't have any plans. You're not allowed to go out like, and drive around in cars and stuff because you're too young. So what are you going to do? You're going to turn the channel Nickelodeon, and you're going to sit on the big orange couch and watch Roundhouse, Are You Afraid of the Dark? And Are You Afraid of the Dark was always at like 9:30, and then 10 o'clock, boom, time to go to bed. But one time I stayed up extra late, and I saw my first taste of X-Files, and another time I saw my first taste of Tales from the Crypt, the episode where the dragon bursts out of the dude's chest.
Ooh, fun one.
Yeah.
I remember my first episode of X-Files made me not watch X-Files for like 2 years. It was
What was your first episode?
It was the one where they're hunting down the worm guy.
Ooh.
And when they do like the close up on the worm guy's face, and he like doesn't have eyes, he's got that creepy fucking mouth. As a kid, that scared the bejesus out of me, and I did not go back to X-Files for a long time.
My first episode was the Fireflies, that like,
that's a good one.
Like they made those cocoons or whatever, and they somehow survived. Like I remember like the people early on in the episode, they were not lucky, but somehow Mulder and Scully survived the being cocooned.
Well, they had all that plot armor on them.
Right. Yeah, they were covered in plot armor, so the cocoons did not harm them. But yeah, man, 90s TV was just, honestly, it was great. Like we grew up in a great era of TV. All the generations that would come, it's like we really are like this, just in the way that the third rock from the sun is necessary to like, for like, we're the perfect distance from the sun for like, to have life. I feel like we were like the perfect distance from whatever for television, because if it was a little bit before, not to say that 80s television and 70s television wasn't great, 80s television is pretty great, but it just wasn't as, weird and crazy as the 90s would get. And then, everything after the 90s, all of a sudden you have YouTube comes out, and like suddenly people are consuming content differently. So you're not getting appointment television the way you had appointment television in the 90s.
No, and I always, like, way off topic even further, I always credit that to Sopranos, because after The Sopranos, TV changed forever. Like we
Interesting.
stopped. It was no longer these like
expand.
show up one week, watch an episode, take a couple weeks off, show up, watch another one. You had to watch every week, and it turned TV shows from these like episodic, enjoy as you will, to if you miss an episode, you're behind. You're basically watching very long movies, and that's entirely where we are now.
Wow. And you want to know what? Yes, there were shows like Oz and The Wire, which are also HBO shows that were before it, but it really was. The Sopranos was that first, and that's 1999. That's the end of the 90s. So it really did. You're right on the money with that. Like it really was that first time where you're like, no, I got to be here every week because at the water cooler, I need to be able to talk about what we saw the previous week, which was like a mini movie. It's just like the big thing happened. Like, did spoilers even exist in the 90s? Like,
it was on Sunday. Did you not watch it? Well, then you missed it forever.
Yep. You missed it forever. Not my problem. Here's what it's about. And, you know, like people taping stuff off of VHS or taping things onto VHS. And, a lot of those, I have like a whole box full of things I taped on VHS, like just sitting, collecting dust. And, a part of me is like, wow, you have no time in the world to even open that box. But the other part of me is like, hey, let's procrastinate and distract yourself further from every other task you have in life and digitize all these tapes to see what weird shit is on them.
If not only just to watch the commercials again.
Yep, that's what it really would be all about. Forget about the shows because you could just find them streaming somewhere. It's about all the crazy commercials, and thank God, there's some archive or some video archive doing the Lord's work. They're digitizing they digitized something like 20,000 VHS tapes. I don't know of what, and put them all for free on the internet. I'm sure there are hours and hours of commercials. I mean, that's why YouTube is so precious and important because, while we go, oh man, look at how it's killing traditional media, at the same time, it's also saving and preserving these things that you're never going to find anywhere else. And the only place to find them is on YouTube.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, there's definitely some good and bad to YouTube, but I will always appreciate it, at least for that. But I think we've said pretty much everything. Now that we're talking HBO, I think we've officially covered our episodes of Doug and Angry Beavers, so we should start saying goodbyes. And we will start that with plugs. Jeff, where can people find you online if they liked what they heard today?
So right now you can just go to www.frumess.com. That's my website. That's all my doings. You could go to Facebook, check out Wash Away. That's the second feature-length film I'm currently in the process of shooting. I shot 20% of it before Corona hit. Thank God. Like, man, and I'm, and I don't want to say that like in like a rubbing it in other people's faces sort of way, because I know a lot of my friends, a lot of, my acquaintances who were just devastated and destroyed because all their shoots got canceled and shut down. And I just keep thinking in my head, like, oh my God, can you imagine if you had pushed it one more week and you wouldn't have shot anything? And we have 20% in the can, so I feel good about that. So that's Wash Away, and check out Romeo's Distress on Vimeo or whatever. That's my first feature-length film.
Fantastic. As for us here, as always, we have athpod.com where you can find all of our shows, including Samwise, the Advice Podcast. Then we have Demon Days, the actual D&D play podcast. Then we have Behind the Hype on Thursdays, and then Damage Boost on Fridays. And then we always have articles coming out pretty much every week now. They're mostly just recommendations of things to watch while you're quarantined. But we know Matt Dykes is also working on plenty more articles. He did write that Doctor Who article. He has not shown it to me yet. And I know it is mostly just to piss me off, but I'm totally fine with that. Jeff, is there anything else you'd like to plug really quick before we leave, or did that cover everything?
Yeah, actually I would. I was hoping that you would give me one more chance. I just want to say for you listeners out there, if you're really into cartoons, and obviously there's a lot, you should check these cartoons out. First of all, you got to check out Heavy Metal if you haven't seen it. It's a great friggin' movie from the 80s. Check that out. Look out for Heavy Metal. And a personal thing that I want to promote and plug and proselytize and just spread the good word. There's a movie. It came out. It's the only movie by Nirvana, the Canadian production company that produced a lot of cartoons like Strawberry Shortcake, and they produced one movie. It's called Rock and Rule. It has this crazy punk rock soundtrack with Iggy Pop, Deborah Harry's on it, Earth, Wind and Fire, Cheap Trick, and it's like a rock and roll sci-fi futuristic cartoon movie that's like super adult and crazy, and it's kind of in the same vein of heavy metal, and it was bootlegged and impossible to find for years. You can get it now. Actually, it's free to watch on YouTube, like legitimately free to watch on YouTube. So check out that movie, Rock and Rule. You will love it. Great songs. Lou Reed songs. Just great, crazy stuff.
I've never even heard of that. That sounds amazing.
Okay, listen, Brian, and I'm not joking. If you reach the end of your itinerary, your list, if you can't, or if you're looking for content, or you have a filler week, or you just need you have a spot to fill, please watch Rock and Rule. I'm going to send you the YouTube link, and if you ever want to talk about Rock and Rule, we are going to talk about Rock and Rule. We have to.
I'm not sure what I have coming up after Roger Rabbit. I feel like I have one more after that, but if not, maybe we'll try to get Graham out of quarantine a little bit. For the history of me and Jeff's friendship is Graham, the former co-host of Venture Bros, introduced me to Jeff, and he would have been on this week, but he doesn't like Nick cartoons, so he was unable to record. But yeah, maybe we'll try to get him on for that one too, and then the three of us can have a good chat about it.
Yes.
Cool. All right, so Jeff, thank you so much for doing this. I know it's a 3-hour time difference, so it's a little bit tough to schedule, but I think this turned out really good.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Brian. Really appreciate it.
And a big thank you to everyone listening again, and thank you to everybody who's been sticking with us past Venture Bros. I know a lot of you are just diehard Venture Brothers fans, and you're just kind of keep listening for the hell of it, and you are my favorite people. So thank you very much for listening. I love you all, and bye!